again, thank you for having me. And once again, if I talk too fast or if you don't understand something, either because of my accent or because it's too linguistic-y, just let me know and then we're gonna go through it slowly. So today I want to talk about bilingualism and its consequences. The presentation is mostly about the consequences, which are code switching, code blending. This is primarily my areas of research, so that's why. So we're going to start first with some basic definitions of bilingualism. It represents the knowledge and use of two or more languages. Wow. There are two types of bilingualism that I want to talk about today, and these are unimodal bilingualism, where an individual has a knowledge of two languages in the same modality. So someone is a unimodal bilingual if they speak two languages or they sign two languages. I know people who know three sign languages. So, and then bimodal bilingualism. A bimodal bilingual is an individual who knows a spoken language and a sign language. This is usually hearing people who have some connections with the deaf community. Their parents are deaf, or sometimes people just really want to learn a sign language, so they become bimodal bilinguals. We'll see what the similarities and differences are, but everything clear so far? All right. So at first, I just wanted to get this out of the way. So when it comes to language acquisition and unilinguals versus bilinguals, so apart from a huge range of differences between unimodals and between unimodals and unilinguals and bilinguals, there's no significant difference in terms of the timing of certain linguistic structure, the acquisition of it. So there might be some delays in the sense of like 2 or 3 months delays for some structures, but overall bilingualism doesn't hurt the child, it only improves. Yeah, so we think it's funny because we grow up, in multilingual societies, but in the States, bilingualism is still a scary topic for a lot of people. They think adding another language would impair their child. So, just want to point that out. But we might, because we see some delays, it's pretty normal given that the input quantity and structure for unilinguals versus bilinguals is different. Just for one, you get less input in the two languages than you would get in one language. It's impossible to get the same amount. And then a lot of bilinguals speak one language at home, the other one at school. So the type of structures, but the type of language that you speak at home, it's not the same as at school. So then you become more proficient in one aspect of the language and less proficient in the other one. But overall, they're fine. When it comes to bimodal bilinguals, and we don't have time to talk about that a lot today, but the quality of their sign language, especially if they're deaf kids born to hearing parents, it's not the same as if it was a hearing kid born to deaf parents, getting input from native signers who, just a native language, or you get input from someone who's just learning a new language. So those all account for various differences, but no delays, in terms of no significant delays. So this is just some basic timeline for bilinguals. So at 4.5 months of age, bilinguals can separate their native languages, so they can distinguish between, English and Chinese. And then at the same time, they can recognize when there's a switch between the languages. So if they have parents who speak different languages, they can recognize that there's a switch in the language. At 6 months, there's a native phonemic distinction as opposed to non-native phonemic distinction. So if they hear, a non-native language on TV, they will be able to sense the phonemic distinction, as in, clear vowels in Serbian and not so clear vowels in English. That type of distinction. And 14 to 21 months, they actually recognize that these are two languages and I'm not speaking just one, so that's when they're figuring out that they're bilingual. Alright, so let's move on into the consequences of bilinguals. There are two types of language mixing I want to talk about today. This is code switching versus code blending. When it comes to unimodal bilingualism, there is a lot of code switching, especially if they live in communities with bilinguals. Code blending, there's not really the code blending that we see in bimodal bilinguals, but we're going to see as we go that the definitions and sort of the theory behind blending and switching is a little iffy, so there might be some code blending, but not in the same sense that bimodal bilinguals express it. Code switching is rule governed. You can't just do random things and consider it speech. There are some constraints. The articulators are the mouth and the vocal tract. And when it comes to bimodal bilingualism, there's also code switching, though it's very little. It's only around 6% of the mixing production. The rest of it is blending. There's code blending, obviously, and it's again rule governed, and there are constraints. And the articulators are hands, body, facial expression. So apart from articulators, there's really no difference in this. And it's been debated in the literature for years and years and years whether bilinguals have two grammatical systems or three when they code switch. So all of that is very complicated, and we haven't decided yet, so we don't know. It's just complicated. Hopefully after this presentation, you're going to have an idea of why it's so complicated. Alright, so code switching, it's alternating between two languages while using elements from both. And these are three major types of code switching. There's some other classifications, but these are the most common ones. So there's intersentential code switching, and that's not too interesting for linguists just because you use one utterance in one language and the other one in the other language. So the kind of information you get, the kind of linguistic information you get from this one is that you can speak two languages. The more interesting one is intrasentential, because there you see switches within the same utterance and sometimes within the same phrases as you linguists know. So this is a switch from Spanish-English. As you can see, the noun phrase is in Spanish, and then we have the verb phrase in English, and then again we have a switch within the verb phrase, so with the conjunct in Spanish. And then this is sort of the most complicated one to account for, because at first the word was considered, just a word with what kind of word internal do you talk about? Do you talk about different sounds within the word? Do you talk about grammatical morphemes? And so we're going to talk about that too. This is a very complicated one, and it just amazes me, so I just put it up there. I don't know how to pronounce it. But as you can see, the English is switched into the mlades. It's probably shown on determiner, but I don't speak Alright, so intersentential code switching, this is what we want to deal with. And there's some examples from, this is Romanian and Serbian. We're going to hear more about this as part of my research. But as you can see, you have, the glasses are a little messed up. As you can see, so un is the article in Romanian for masculine, and then Petroj is in Serbian, and then the examen is in Romanian. So we're going to talk about that more. Then in Japanese, English, I knew this was going to happen. We have again forget in Japanese and the utterance in English. And then in Spanish and German, code switching. We're going to talk about this paper a little bit because they get a phenomenon that's not present in the in either German or Spanish, but when they code switch, they get an additional construction. All right. So some basic facts. Code switching is very common in bilingual communities. So sometimes back in the days when we didn't know much about code switching, it was believed that there was an unbalanced dominance, so you kind of supplemented one of the languages with the other, but that's very rarely the case. There's various sociocultural and pragmatic reasons why bilinguals code switch, but it's also because they can. So it just comes out naturally. But where we see language mixing, we also see a lot of interlanguage influence. So when the two languages interact, they're bound to have some influence on each other. The code switch speech is structured and rule governed, and there have been attempts to come up with constraints that are specific to code switching. We're going to see that all of them failed. And then we're kind of turning towards a more general constraints in terms of like looking into linguistic universals and just structure in general. All right, so this is the pioneering work that kind of started it all. Myers-Scotton's dissertation was a study of English and Spanish code switching. No, sorry, English and Swahili code switching. And she came up with a lot of these concepts are proved to be false now, but everyone knows about Myers-Scotton matrix language frame model. So her explanation was that when two languages interact, there's a matrix language that supplies all the functional items and just the structure of the speech, and then there's an embedded language that sort of just supplements, and it's usually content words. So you would have an English structured DP with just a noun in another language. So it's kind of just filling in, not doing any changes to the structure. So like we see here, most of the structure is in English, the word order is in English, and there's just one content word. Well, it's a classifier, so. And in this example, English is considered to be the matrix language and Swahili in the any questions so far? All right. Now we're going to talk about various constraints that have been proposed, but it's good to know about them, and it's good to see that when looking at code switching, just looking at one language pair is not enough to make generalization for cross-linguistic code switching. So Poplack, a long time ago, said that there's the free morpheme constraint that codes may be switched after any constituent in discourse, provided that that constituent is not a bound morpheme. So, like we see here, in English and Spanish, Q's is a bound morpheme, so there can be switches within it. Or as in 9, where we have the English infinitive and then adding the Spanish progressive form. it has been proven that this is possible. So in the variety that she was looking at, that wasn't possible. So, and it has been proven that this type of switches are possible if, you'll see, if what? All right. Everyone knows what a boundary morpheme is, right? Because another constraint was the equivalence constraint, and this one again was proved to be wrong, but basically what this one said was that codes can be switched where the surface structures of the two languages match, but not in the like word for word, but linguistically when they match. So they have an example of English and Spanish again. So as you can see, even though in the you have told him and le dije, you have different word order, but linguistically they belong to the same phrase. So switches can be possible. This has also been proven to be wrong because switching does all sorts of things, move things around, and but this is just another constraint that it's important to know. Functional head constraint. It's a very complex constraint, but basically this is what's important. So this has also been proven wrong, but it basically doesn't allow code switching between a functional head and its complement. And again, like you see here, so this type of switch for them is not possible, although there's been a huge amount of literature where there's a switch between the article and the noun. So again, he was just looking at his variant of Spanish-English code switching, and other variants of Spanish-English code switching allow that. So again, this is the type of switch that his variant doesn't allow, but there's no functional head constraint in that sense. It's more looking at the feature of each element. So if they match, you can go ahead and switch. If there's something that doesn't match, either there's going to be adjustment or the switch will not be possible. But it's not as strict as that. All right. This is another study. This is a study that looked at structures as opposed to code switch speech as a whole. So they were just trying to analyze, instead of coming up with a constraint that will apply to the entire, code switch speech of Spanish and German, they were focusing on the possible constructions and what they can do in those cases. One second. So these light switches are called light switches, not because they're easy to analyze, but because they use the light verbs do in Spanish. So light verbs are verbs with no actual content meaning. They just kind of like supply a form for a higher meaning. So like in English you have throw a party. So throw is not the actual verb throw, but it's just a light verb for the expression. So in this variant, even though German and Spanish don't have light verb construction with do, when switchers united, they came up with a light verb, a Spanish light verb in this variant of code switching. There's also been light verbs are very common. Like I said before, if the features don't match, there's either going to be some adjustment or the switch is not going to happen. So light verbs have been documented a lot lately in code switching variants. So that's some way of the system kind of adjusting to connecting the two languages with the use of this light verb. But there's also light verbs in monolingual grammar, so it's not something that bilinguals came up with. All right. Okay, another study by them. They have the whole lab. This is in Illinois. Their lab is, they just work on code switching. So they have grad students who just work on code switching. It's pretty awesome. So what they did with these examples is they were trying to account for the asymmetry of using, remember what we saw in Spanish, eat, yendo? So there's an asymmetry between whether you can use a German, okay, so a Spanish infinitive, this should be the other way around. No, this is good. A German infinitive with the Spanish infinitive ending. And why you can do that, but you can't use a German infinitive with the Spanish infinitive ending. So there's an asymmetry in that. And what they found was that because Spanish endings, Spanish inflections for verbs are actual conjugation classes, they can't just stick to anything. They have to have a verb that requires incorporation between the verb and the conjugation class. Whereas German conjugation classes are not real conjugation classes, therefore they allow another element to attach to them. That was just in a nutshell. But as you can see, the differences are very fine-grained, and just by looking at the two examples, you can say, oh, you can't say this, but you can't say that. Why is that? You know, so you have to look really deep into the actual monolingual grammar to see why it allows what it allows. So this is just them saying that the light verb construction is not possible in Spanish, but it's used as a light verb in the code switching period. This is gonna be fun. Alright, just picked one more. This is the last one, but this one works too. And then we're gonna switch to more data. So the P of disjunction theorem by McSwan. McSwan is a big name in code switching. If you are looking at code switching, you can read some of his work. But basically, what his constraint was, he said that switches below a head are ill-formed. So if you have a word and it's a head, you can switch within it. But we'll see that there's a lot of counter evidence. And the first one to point it out was Vanessa and Dickon, and they looked at causatives, and they looked at English and Telugu. So as you can see here, there's a head, and the switch between English, this is a Telugu ending, sorry, I should have. The switch between the English verb and a Telugu ending is not possible. The switch between a Telugu verb and an English ED is also not possible, but the switch between a Telugu verb and a causative plus ED ending is possible. So a lot of explanation was done in their papers, but basically they refined the P of disjunction theorem, and they said that code switching between phonological words that are morphosyntactic heads are not possible. But if it's just a phonological word, but it's comprised of two morphemes, for example, that's in a very simple way, then it's possible. So code switching within a phonological head is possible, but within a syntactic head is not possible. So this was based more on a universal constraint and not based on code switching. So bare stems cannot stand on their own, therefore they need something to attach to. So like if you have an affix attaching to a syntactic head, that does form a syntactic unit, but it's comprised of two syntactic units into one phonological head. So I'm going to have better examples with Serbian and Romanian, and that's going to be easier to see. All right, so this was one of my first serious research into code switching, and it was based on their work. So what I did, I gathered data from speech produced by Romanian speakers. They were college students, so they had an equal amount of exposure of both Romanian and Serbian, and they were pretty homogeneous because they grew up in a Romanian town. They went to elementary school in Romanian, but to high school in Serbian, and then college in Serbian. So and they were pretty equal in their bilingualism status. This is a highly bilingual community. It's also my hometown, so I know a lot of people there. So the way I did is I would just talk to them the way we talk every day, or I had some elicitation where I would ask them to say something by code switching, and then I also had a bunch of sentences that we linguists like but they hate, so I also had some grammaticality judgments. This is something that we're not going to get into unless we have time and unless someone is really interested in it, but it's basically just the Romanian and Serbian DP and NP and what the differences and the similarities are. This was important for my paper, but it will take a longer time to explain, so if we have time or if you're very interested, we can talk about it. But this will be it in a nutshell. So my assumption was, based on Boschkovic 2008, that Romanian is a DP language, which means that it has articles, and Serbian is an NP language, which means that it doesn't have articles. So as you see here, when you have a definite, this is the definite Romanian article. So the definite article is a suffix and it's a vowel morpheme, but the indefinite article is a separate free morpheme that comes before the noun. So we're just going to focus on this one. And the Serbian noun phrase, there's no definite article. Serbian uses adjectives, short and long forms, to express some sort of specificity or definiteness. We still don't know. But in code switching, we can, the Romanian article, the suffix, can attach to the Serbian noun. So from before, this is a word internal code switching, and it's very possible. But as you can see here, it doesn't, so this is where the noun would be, and this is where the article is, the suffix. So this is not initially a syntactic unit. It's just affix hopping, the way Romanian determiner attaches onto the noun is a phonological process, so it actually forms a phonological unit. So these are just some of the examples that work or don't work in Serbian-Romanian code switching. I just want to say a few things about this, and then we're going to move to the most interesting example, and we're going to see why. But as you can see, the Romanian article can attach onto the Serbian noun, but it can't attach to the Serbian adjective. What I said was that since Serbian has its own way of expressing specificity on the adjective, so it has a short and a long form of adjectives like težak, teški, then I said that the actual way of expressing specificity is faithful to the language. So if I'm using a Serbian adjective, I'm first going to look for any ways of expressing specificity in that language, and then if there's nothing, then I'm going to grab from Romanian. But as you can see here in C, the article cannot attach onto the adjective. So the only way to code switch Serbian adjectives is in their full form, as in with their 5 features and with their specificity features. So the way why I said this example was very interesting, and I think it's we don't have to deal with this. Okay, yeah, we should maybe talk about this a little bit. Why this works in terms of features is because the Romanian D has a value definiteness feature. So the way it values the unvalued definiteness feature on the noun is by agreeing with it, but and the agreement is transitive, so then the noun will also, if the noun agrees with the determiner, the adjective will agree with it too. So as you can see here, we can't have a definite context but an indefinite adjective. This is a different word order. We don't have time to talk about that, but
Why?
why?
Yeah, 22A. Why can't you have that?
Because you really want to talk about this now. It's gonna get into really complicated stuff. Okay, so Romanian adjectives that can host definite articles always have to be phrase initial. So you will never have, I'm going to use Serbian words, but I don't say Romanian. Serbian words, but this is Romanian. So in Romanian, you can only have teški computer. You can never have computer teški. So if you want to have a definite article on the noun, it has to go phrase initial. So the adjective can be in its non-specific form, because if it had moved up, then it has to be definite. So in order for it to be definite, it can't do this because it doesn't accept any Romanian morphology, but it can do this. We can talk more about that if you want later, but why this example is interesting is because in neither Romanian nor Serbian you get this sort of double definiteness on both the adjective and the noun, because Romanian has the Romanian determiner attaches either to the adjective or to the noun, to the element that's phrase initial, so either the adjective or the noun. And Serbian doesn't have definite articles, so it will only have this specificity on the adjective. But in code switching, this is what people can do. And we're gonna, just 5 features are valued as if, don't think about having 2 languages, just think about features. Okay, so this is what I think happened. So in general, ignore what it says on the right for now, and just ignore also the words, just focus on the structure. So, and this was a purely Romanian structure, and you had an adjective here, and you wanted to make it definite. The affix would hop onto the adjective, and the noun will remain in the second position. If your noun was definite, then you would want the article on the noun, and then the noun would move up. Up here, the article would hop onto the noun, and then the adjective will remain in its main non-definite form down here. Now, when this type of construction happens, we have a definite. There's only one position for Serbian adjectives. So we have a definite adjective, but we also have the definite Romanian article. So, where's my arrow? So the article is trying to hop onto the adjective. The adjective is already definite from its own language. So there's no phonological merging. So there can be double definiteness, and there can be just the Romanian definiteness because the adjective is already definite. But it agrees with it because it sees, okay, he's higher in the structure, he's also definite, this is sort of okay, but I need somewhere to go because I'm a vowel morpheme. And then what happens, it probes further down for another viable host, and this is the noun. And in Romanian, this would generally not happen, but this is what happens in the code switching variant. So, any questions about this one? No, we're good. All right. So this is some more Romanian and Serbian switches that give rise to more linguistic curiosities, and this is just progress. I'm currently working on this, but I just wanted you to see what else can happen when two different languages, structurally, when they come together. So I don't know if you've heard of clitic doubling. So clitic doubling is a phenomenon found only in DP languages, in languages with articles. And this is what it means is that you have the argument present, but you also have a clitic for that argument in the structure. So, and there are some, I think Jelena had some clitic doubling in her Timok Serbian. Yeah, so that was a very curious case. That was very cool to see. But in general, in monolingual grammars, there's no, this is not attested. So, but is Macedonian a DP language?
Yes. It has articles.
It does?
It's not in Bulgarian.
But, okay, so what we see here is that we have the Romanian object clitic, we have the Romanian auxiliary, and then we have the Serbian participle, and then we have the argument in Romanian. It can also be in Serbian, but then the clitic doubling doesn't really work. So, again, this type of switch between the auxiliary and the participle is not uncommon, so that's not too interesting. But I want you to appreciate this. So this is clitic doubling that is present in Romanian, but it's not in Serbian, and then there's additional curiosities because Serbian being an NP language shouldn't be able to have a DP argument, but the DP argument sort of allows for the clitic doubling. So now I'm trying to see how that works and how a Serbian verb that selects an NP argument can select a DP argument and allow clitic doubling. And this is another example of that type of switch. And then, so another curiosity and something that is not seen in monolingual grammars is, you probably know this, but there are some languages that they use have as their auxiliary, some of them use be as their auxiliary. So in languages that use have as their auxiliary, there's no participle agreement with the subject. So like you have in Serbian. So in Serbian you have the be auxiliary, so you have gender and number agreement on the participle of the verb. Romanian doesn't have that, but when we code switch, we use the Romanian auxiliary, and then we take the Serbian participle together with the agreement. So there is a Romanian auxiliary be, and that's where the participle, it's used in passive construction, and that's where there is agreement, gender and number agreement with the participle of the passive. But when it's the have auxiliary, it's just not used together. So this is something that maybe I'll talk to you about in a year. Alright, now this is a little bit of a brain break and just a very quick summary of what we've talked about so far. So just that code switching is very productive and very present in bilingual communities and bilingual interactions. And when it comes to theory and research and code switching, constraints and rules that are applicable only for code switching that do not seem to hold cross-linguistically for all the code switching variants. So instead, we should turn to approaching this just like a regular natural language, natural constructions, and approach them, based on linguistics universals and the languages involved. So if you have, like I said, if you have a DP and an NP language, you have to work with the two. If you have two NP languages, you don't have to say anything about the DP, about the determiner. So any questions about code switching before we move on to code blending? And do you need a 2-3 minute break or?
Can I ask a question about as regards the position of adjectives? It's quite, I saw that you can have like the post-nominal position of adjectives. No, you checked for Romanian. No, because they're bilingual, so it's all the same. So you can have like Serbian noun and then an adjective post-nominal adjective.
The Serbian.
Romanian.
Yeah.
Okay. And the other way around. No, because that would be normal. Okay, you can have like the Serbian adjective, pre-nominal, and then Romanian noun.
Yes, but you can also have the Serbian adjective post-nominally, but only the non-specific one.
Okay, yeah, that's what I saw.
Yeah. I can go back if you want. You want me to go back?
But I was just thinking about more like a more general picture.
Oh, what you
get
can do?
all kind of combinations.
Yeah, I have that too. That's the big table. So it's over here. So I called them T1 and T2, just for the sake of. My advisor said it's not more simple for other people, but it's simpler for me. So T1 are just plain adjectives. If you look at, I was trying to look at elements participating just as a whole different system in terms of like, okay, this is what I have, and I don't want to deal with whether this comes from Serbian or from Romanian. So for me, T1 adjectives were just the plain and the non-definite short form adjectives. So you would have a Romanian adjective without the article, or just a short form adjective in Serbian like težak or visok, as opposed to visoki, teški. And the T2 adjectives were Romanian adjective hosting the determiner, and the Serbian adjectives were more specific. So this is the possibilities you can
But
get.
you don't get the combination. That's what my question. You don't have the distinction between. You have a whole set of adjectives that do not distinguish between the two forms. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
So
in
I was
Serbian,
like,
yeah.
For example, because in Romanian, as in Italian and in most Romance languages, like the canonical position for the adjectives is post-nominal, and in Serbian you have pre-nominal position. So I was interested in like, if you just like forget for a moment like the article and the whatever the determiner, just like the position, do you have constraints that, as regards the position of adjectives
In
code switching? Yeah, like forget these adjectives, definite, indefinite, just like, I don't know, what do you think? For example, in Serbian you have mali, which is like you don't have the pair,
Yeah, so when there's no pair, there's no distinction in Serbian too. So I haven't checked a lot of adjectives with that, but when there's no distinction, you treat it as a non-definite. So again, there's no Romanian morphology on it, but you can place it. Well, actually, you would only be able to. You can place it anywhere because there's no distinction. But I haven't gone through all of the adjectives.
Yeah,
I was,
the realm of adjectives so complex, and especially when you take into consideration the two languages.
No, it was a lot. But the main point is that in this variant, whenever you have an adjective with some sort of definiteness on it, it has to be phrase initial. So the definiteness attracts something up. So whatever is definite has to go high. All right. Any other questions, clarifications? Want to know more something?
So it means that you couldn't have, for example, you have like temporal adjectives, for example, zadnji. But in Romanian also, I get they're always prenominal, right? So in code switching, they just you have to place them first.
Okay, so moving.
Sorry.
You're fine. Okay, so moving on to code blending. This is the mixing of two languages in different modalities, and this allows, but it's not obligatory, for simultaneous production of both languages. That's where the party starts. So as you can see, like this is one simple example of English and ASL code blending. So this is when the speaker says, I want to dump this, and as they say dump, they also use the American Sign Language word for pour, which is not completely equivalent, but in that context that was equivalent. And like I said, code switching is predominantly found in unimodal bilingual interaction. In bimodal bilingual interaction, it only represents 6% of the mixed utterances. Code blending represents 98% of all the mixing interaction. So these numbers are taken from various studies. That's why 6% and 90% doesn't really add up. But the point is that when bimodal bilinguals mix, they mostly blend and not switch. The switching is pretty unnatural, especially if you speak and then you start speaking, then shut up and sign, and then speak again. So signers treat it as very unnatural. So the switch is usually the other way around. You have the speech, and then you have blends. But it's very uncommon. So it's mostly blending. All right. And just a little bit of note about sign languages. Not that the linguists need that, but we kind of have to say that. It's just that apart from the difference in the modality, sign languages have the same status as spoken languages in terms of linguistic structure and the type of languages they are. So they're natural language used not only by deaf people worldwide. They have independent grammars, independent meaning from the spoken variant in the society. So a lot of people, even in the States, just think that ASL is just signed English, that it doesn't have its own structure. It has their own structure, their own vocabulary, and then what a word is for a spoken language is a sign is for a sign language. And there are multiple sign languages in the world depending on the region or the country. Spain has two sign languages, two official sign languages, has Spanish sign language and Catalan sign language, so it's not restricted in one country, one sign language. There's international sign, and that's used at various meetings, international meetings and conferences, and that's a content variety. It's an artificial language that is comprised of different elements from different sign languages, sort of like Esperanto, but this one works more and is used just to be able to hold meetings or conferences and for everyone to understand. But that's just one system, and the other ones are just languages separate on their own. Any questions about sign languages? Alright, so some facts about code blending, common in bilingual communities. Again, it's not because of a non-balanced dominance. It happens, but that's not the reason why it happens. Again, sociocultural and pragmatic reasons, and because they can and they kind of have to, in the sense that it's been proven that it's easier to blend than to not blend. So they don't really have to, but it's easier for the bilinguals to use both languages. Again, where there's language mixing, there's also language influence, so we're going to see some of the influence between the two languages. Again, the speech is also structured and rule governed, but we have another additional factor that's very important, and this is the simultaneous production. This, I didn't put any examples here, but there's, so in ASL and English, simultaneous production, it's not that big of a deal because the word order is pretty much the same. But in Italian Sign Language, it's called LIS. It has a different word order. It's OSV, I think, or OSV, I think. I'm not exactly sure, but there has been data about how Italian signers would say an SVO sentence and sign an OSV sentence simultaneously. But that's very cool and very uncommon in general. So, and there's only been like a couple of papers, so we don't know if that's something that actually happened or if they were selected examples. But
Can I ask you a question?
yes.
Like cross-linguistical, do the same word order, like which predominance do you have, like in sign languages, VO or OV?
SVO, but there's a lot of topicalization. So it might appear that there's an OSV order because in sign languages, it's common practice to kind of set up this scene before you talk about something. So unless you really want to say I bought a house, then you would say a house I bought. So, but it's SVO underlyingly. So this is just a model. This is one of my advisors at UConn, and she's constantly working on updating this model. But this is just to sort of see how complicated it gets when you have the simultaneous production. We're not going to go too much into this, but it's basically sort of, we think of the root morphemes as having all of them on display, and then as you go further down into various syntactic operations, and then phonology separates because you have one articulator versus the other. But either way, if analyzing code blends is complicated, it's even more complicated to kind of come up with a model of what's actually happening. And this is another example of simultaneous production, and it's just blending a verb. So he's saying, so Sylvester, who's on the ledge, jumps into the apartment. Yes, jumps into the apartment. So as you can see, even though only jump, this is the verb for jump, but you get a lot of, and you were talking about that, you get a lot of grammatical information into just one sign. So jump here incorporates jump and into because this is the movement that you did. So if you say jump onto, you would do this, and then that's one movement, but you have a lot of grammatical information incorporated into that. So there's just one example of simultaneous production. Types of code blends. We have a single sign where you only see one sign embedded into the structure, so she didn't even sign until 14. So the scope of the sign can vary, whether it's across one sign or across more signs. For example, if you have negation, then it can vary across the entire utterance. And in this case, I don't know if there was any facial expression that indicated the even sign, sort of. I don't know, this is an example from another paper, but or there's multiple sign code blends where in 29, so he was, I don't know responsible what it is, but printing is this, I think. So you get two signs into the structure, so it can be more than two, but this is just the type of classification that they get. And there's also semantically equivalent code blend, so you get, and there's the bird, and then you say the bird, but in this case, it's only semantically right because you don't get the, but ASL is considered to be an NP language, so there's no the, and that's another story, but, and then you get the semantically non-equivalent where you get the starting of the sign. That's also another issue when analyzing code blending. It's also the timing of the sign, because you need to, you're trying to see whether, how much planning there is for you to start signing something in the middle of the sentence. And then it takes a little bit longer to sign than to speak, so there's a lot of
really simultaneous, really.
Yes.
100%. Is there like this?
So that's what's so in the semantically non-equivalent one, it's he starts saying, so the English utterance, if you strip down the sign, is and my mom's walking down, but he starts signing walking down the stairs as he's saying my mom. But this is also a classifier construction which incorporates an agent going down the stairs. But it's not equivalent because he didn't say my mom, but he just put her as a classifier, and then he started this all the way here because the sign is incorporated. So this is a more complicated blend in terms of like you need to analyze everything that's in it, but sometimes you have some, like, it's never, only kids do something like late insertion of the sign, but in general the speech, the blends, they look so smooth. And if you know a little bit of ASL at least and know the spoken language, if you know English, then it's just so smooth, like it appears so smooth and simultaneous. Any questions? We don't have much left, so. Alright, so we talked about language influence. So in code blending, there's also language influence. As we saw in the Romanian-Serbian one, you get some influence because you can place the adjectives on different sides based on the Romanian structure. But here, this is more like an expression type of influence. So in ASL, you wouldn't sign now and recently go to the adverbials are usually at the end because there's no tenses. So the way you set up the utterance, it's always you talk about something and then you either put it at the end. But either way, the sign is not a grammatical ASL structure. It's influenced by the English. And this is an example from a kit. And this is where ASL sort of is the matrix language, but we don't really want to use that. But ASL influences the English structure. So Ben is our star child. He says he's sounding chocolate, eat. So it's topicalization. It's hot chocolate, eat. He's setting up the scene when he's eating. So this is, you'll never say in English chocolate, eat. sessions. Wow, what happened here? Bimodal bilingual whispering. This is our last topic for today. So this is a project that I started with two of my friends and colleagues. So we just noticed that kids, we have a lot of videos from when they're like a few months old until they're like 9. So we noticed while transcribing that there's a lot of whispering happening, and especially in ASL sessions, that means in the sessions where they are asked to sign with deaf interlocutors. So we weren't really sure why the kids would whisper when someone can't even hear them, and why would they not use their full voice but whisper. So we just thought it was cool, and then we started analyzing it. So, but the phenomenon is whispering while signing, whispering English lexical items while signing, and it's usually found in, okay, I have that. So it's common among bilingual children, not so much with adults, but some adults recall that they used to whisper when they were younger, or that their children now whisper. So in what context? It's in sign language dominant context. There's literally no whispering in speech dominant context. So like when we have our coda kids, then we have 1 week of ASL session, 1 week of English session. So we alternate. So in the ASL sessions, there's a ton of whispering, and the English session is just spoken English. There's blending, but there's no whispering. And there's also, we also found whispering in if we alternated sessions within one session. So if we had, this is more with our experimental sessions where the kid watches a video and then we're asking them to tell us in English what they saw and then sign it. So even within the same session, they would not use whispering in English when they use fully voiced English, and in the ASL session they would whisper. So that was pretty cool too. And why to do that? So we thought that it has to do a lot with how bilinguals learn how to suppress one of their language, but it's also language suppression is cognitively more costly than using both languages. So what whispering allows these kids, plus they're also in their acquisition process, so they're trying to navigate between the languages. So what whispering allows the voice off, this is the voice off that it's usually the common rule whenever there's a deaf person in the room and you're trying to sign, you're not using your voice. But it also reduces the pressure of the language suppression in bilinguals because you don't fully suppress it, which is more costly, but you also are trying to suppress it a little bit. So that was our theory. And I'm going to show you 2 cute videos because they're really, you have to see them. So this is 2 kids whispering while signing. It's really cute. But they're whispering, so it's going to be quiet. So this is a CI kid, so his parents are deaf. That's his father, and he's deaf, and that's the type of whispering we see. This is a very simple one because he's also very young, but they really, really whisper. And we have a more complex one, and this is from Ben. He's older now, he's 7, and this is whispering to a deaf adult. When did what?
What age did they stop whispering?
Well, this is we have Ben till 8 years old, so he still whispers, but we don't have him later, and we haven't really.
Is it coincide with the critical period?
Well, 8 years old is kind of after, right?
Yeah.
But I don't know. We don't really have teenagers, so we don't know if that happens with teenagers. But we have adults, and they don't whisper. All right. So what we see in whispering, we also see a lot of omitted tense morphology. As you see, there's no tense morphology on the verb. It's usually, what they omit is usually the suffixes. So if it's an ed, that's omitted way more often than if it's an irregular verb, but this was an irregular verb, so that was. Then we see a lot of article omission, which is my next study that we're just going to briefly talk about. And then we also see more word order mismatches in whispering than in fully voiced when blending. So all of that led us to, this is just the amount of whispering in English versus ASL target session. So as you can see, there's barely any 1% of whispering in one session with Gia. And in ASL target session, sometimes almost 100% of whispering. And on the second chart is just, we were trying to figure out who are they mostly whispering with. That's just information. But since we saw a lot of this English grammaticality mismatch, we sort of tried to make this diagram of, the two languages being sort of not like a set up hierarchy, but sort of a liquid mode, especially during acquisition. So we place whispering with blending more towards the spectrum of ASL, because we see fewer grammatical English sentences, and we see more tendency to be the speech to be ASL-y. So we put it kind of towards an ASL part of the spectrum, just because even though lexical items are in English, the structure is clearly far from what the English grammar would be. And let me see if I have this. No, I don't have that. I don't know why I don't have that one. There's another chart where we measure the grammaticality of English in spoken versus signed sessions, and that's what also happened. So we saw that when English was fully voiced, then grammaticality blew up, so it was high to like 90%, 95%. But when English was whispered, it stayed the same during development. So age 2 was around 40%, age 7 was around 60%. But in the same session, English fully voiced sentences were at 90%. So it's not like they haven't acquired English, it's just that whispering sort of is more ASL-like. Does that make sense? Any questions? We have like 5 more slides, so. Alright, this is a follow-up study that I'm currently finishing up. But I'm looking at article distribution in fully voiced versus whispered utterances. And I'm mostly focused on the whispered utterances where I analyze the grammaticality of English, but I was trying to see the reason behind article omission. So article omission is present in general during language acquisition. But since I couldn't find any syntactic patterns to their omission, so they were pretty random in random places, I turned to the phonological aspects of acquisition, and there's been a lot of research, to my surprise, and there's been more explanation to why children omit articles, especially in English. So what these studies found was that children don't really omit various syntactic categories, but they omit weak unstressed syllables in English. So articles, unless emphasized, they are weak unstressed syllables. So what I did, I analyzed all of those, but I need to tell you a little bit of background before that. So in bimodal bilinguals, article omission was more prominent in sign versus spoken sessions. We see more whispering in sign sessions anyways. And there's more article omission in bilinguals versus monolinguals. So if we see more article omission in whispering, it's also partially because they're bilingual. But turning back to articles, so in English they serve a grammatical function, as you know, expressing specificity or definiteness, but they also have a phonological function. They're usually weak and unstressed syllables, but they're also fillers and connectors. So like if you have, I went to the beach, so the is more like connecting your two content words, to the beach. But again, an additional factor is that ASL is also considered an NP language that has no articles, and English has overt articles, AFL. So with all this in mind, my prediction was that the use of English articles should be reduced, or limited during bimodal bilingual whispering, but there was a considerable amount of articles in their whispering, so I just kind of wanted to see what kind of pattern I could find. So this was preliminary data, and I'm currently working on more. So I had 4 experimental sessions of 3 bimodal bilingual children. It's from our corpus at UConn, and I included kids from 5 to 8 years old. And my hypothesis was that articles may be omitted or missing if they're found in a non-stressed syllable, preceded by a strong syllable, but not belonging to the same foot. So to the beach, that belongs to the same foot, but if you just say the beach, you expect that they will omit the article. And in the initial phonological unit. But articles can be used as rhythmic fillers. And we'll see some examples. So I categorized them based on whether they were in the initial position or non-initial position. So this would be their secondary or tertiary position. And the type of omission, just some examples is Gia, she would say, boy, where? She was supposed to describe the picture that she saw, so she would omit the article. But in the secondary position, or non-initial position, here the is pronounced. So in this position, there was, so the red one is article present. So in the initial position, there was more of the omission than there was in the secondary position. And then I categorized based on the environment. So if the article was in the initial position and unstressed versus in the secondary position unstressed but followed by a strong or a weak syllable. And the type of examples that were there was, and girl has yellow hair. So this was after a weak syllable, but the article was still dropped. And this was after a strong syllable, but the article was present. So, but in the initial position, when the article was a weak syllable, there was a higher percentage of omission versus in the non-initial position, even when there was another weak syllable. So they used a lot of connectors like and then and because they were retelling a video that they saw. So okay, any question before I just say what I just said. So my conclusion was, before obtaining more data to even verify the conclusion, that children omit articles due to phonological reasons, since I couldn't find any syntactic patterns. Articles may be omitted in unstressed syllables, followed or preceded by a strong syllable, as long as they don't belong to the same foot, which means as long as they're not a rhythmic filler, and in which case there's a tendency to use the articles. But there's also, this is not the whole story, because we have examples like this one, where in the same utterance we have a child omitting the article and using it in the next clause. So there's more to just, and this is also an example, I put it here because it also shows us that even within the same utterance, if we try to analyze if a code-blended speech or a structure is a DP structure or an NP structure, we have to look at, structures in general and just clauses, just look at very minimally, because in this case, you can't possibly say that a child is only in one mode, he's only in English mode, or he's only in ASL mode. So this is just something fun to look at. And after all of this, there's just some reasons why language mixing happens. So it's because bilinguals have a better control of task inhibition, and learning how to navigate through two languages because learning how to navigate through two languages is a lifelong process. But it has been proven that both languages and bilinguals are always active to some degree. And the whispering study is a kind of nice proof to this, because even when they're whispering, you do everything to keep both languages active. Even if you're just gonna whisper, even if it's just for yourself. And language suppression is more costly than keeping both languages active, so therefore bilinguals just choose the easier way out. So bimodal bilinguals can lower this cost even more by using both languages simultaneously. So beside having both languages active, they can use them at the same time. But they can also code switch, and what bilinguals do too. So bilinguals keep them both active, but they have to alternate, because you can't produce two languages at the same time. I mean, you can produce two languages at the same time, but you cannot produce two lexical items at the same time. So you can be in one mode grammatically and using lexical items of the other one, which is why I said at the beginning that maybe code blending exists in switching too. So it's very complicated. Yes.
How can you prove that language suppression is not caused? What kind of experiments did they conduct
I don't know.
in terms of cognitive?
I don't know, but there are studies. I can send you this article, because they've done.
Fan reactions.
Yeah, I don't. That's a good question. I'm sure I read it, but it's just.
I was curious, just.
Yeah, because you would have to kind of. I don't know. Maybe they did something to the brain. I don't know. And just some benefits of bilingualism that we need to be reminded, but just in case. So bilinguals, there have been studies that show that they have more inventory control system, not just to, languages, but in general, better at multitasking, because they have to constantly switch from one language to the other. Better executive skills like problem solving, attention control, task switching, and they're that experiment with arrows and colors, and you need to, if there's an arrow pointing right, you should press the left button, or if you see written red and blue, then you should press what the color is and not what it says. So those are tasks that bilinguals perform better at. There's also a lot of sociocultural flexibility, because they grow up and are aware of, multiple languages and cultures, so they adapt better at, meeting new people and all of that. There's also studies that show, but there's also studies that show that that's not true, that there's possible delay of Alzheimer's disease onset. This is not, just specific to bilinguals, it's mostly specific to people who do tasks that require constant brain activity. So like chess is also one of those, just that requires constant planning and execution, and then a lot of sports are, so it's not just, being bilingual, but it's mostly, it has to do with like what type of brain activity you are doing. And also because it's awesome to know multiple languages. And these are selected references. I'm gonna send the presentation, and I can upload all the references, but there's also my email on the presentation, so whatever you need, just feel free to follow up. And this is thank you in many languages. Thank you, Vanessa. Thank you for coming in such a great number and for having me, and to my advisors and UConn colleagues, and to the grant that helped us collect the data. So thank you.